Compensiem Planmon, Eve Joseph, Lantisha. Schomish Snanemoch, British Jewish Amen. Kayachtin Tuchnamta Masquium Stalmo, on Chait Ochumeota Masquium. On Haman Squallowin Wet, on Hiem Tan Squallowin Quiz Quachnome Stalmo. Hello everybody, my name is Celia Joseph. My ancestral name is Teheitalot. I come from the village of Stotmas in the Squamish Valley, right under the Stotmas chief. My dad is Chief Lloyd Joseph, Squamish, and on his side we are from Squamish and also Snuneymuxw, from Nanaimo. And on my mother's side, I'm joined by my mom here and my uncle. We're both British and also Jewish, Ashkenazi and Sephardic. So I actually prepared words. Normally I just speak from the heart, but in these times I've been finding myself asked by my Palestinian kin to come and stand with them and to speak, and every word matters, every word counts, and I've been putting so much thought into my prayers for your people and solidarity in this time, so I've prepared my statement. Also because I'm speaking in front of one of my idols, so I'm nervous. So I want to raise my hands to all of you for coming today, of course to our organizers, and raise my hands to one of our lights in this time. To Dr. Gabor Maté, holding a flashlight for us, illuminating pathways towards avenues for connection, to tap into our humanity and give us tools to show up for one another, tools to see through the fog. What has been so helpful is how he's worked with people to think outside of dichotomy, outside of binary. For example, you stand with us or you stand against us. To stand for this means you stand against that. To think outside of the ways that we have been pitted against one another. For as we know from the bottom of our hearts that standing for Palestinian liberation and freedom cannot be separated from standing against anti-Semitism, and that all forms of oppression are connected. I want to speak about my solidarity with you, the Palestinian people, and share a little bit about what mobilizes my people to stand with you and to walk with you. To be Native is to turn on the news and see breaking story after breaking story about seas of unmarked graves of Indigenous children. This is today. This is what it means to turn on our news today, yesterday, tomorrow. When our bodies were being stolen, when our babies were being stolen from their homes, many of the same tactics of dehumanization that I'm seeing weaponized against the Palestinian people were used to justify it, to make it confusing to the average Canadian, to make it complicated, to make it our fault, and to make it seem necessary. And now, we wear orange shirts for those babies, but it's too late for them. We say never again, but we are seeing graves filling by the day with the bodies of the people in Gaza. The majority are little spirits who deserve full futures, just like our babies who never got to come home. If the death of our young ones can teach you anything as a society, it's that we need to fight for the living. Not wait until it's too late. And that's why as Native people we stand with you to follow your lead, to try to breathe life into the futures of your beautiful people. To see you return to your olive trees, to turn off the stoves that were left on because you had to flee your home so quickly and were never allowed to go back. We know our liberation is connected to yours. We know as humans we can't afford to wear any more shirts to honor the dead that we should have fought for by everybody when they were alive. The time is now. We see you, we hear you, and we stand with your humanity always. May our prayers enter the hearts of all those grieving, and let that grief motivate us to fight for something different, something better, something just. All my relations to Montequetzes.
My name is Mohammed. I'm from Palestine, the biggest prison in the world, city Gaza. And I'm for what Israel is doing in Palestine. This what happened now in Gaza is not the 3 weeks ago. This is what happened is many, many years in Gaza and Palestine. And when I went 15, Israel drone bombs me and my cousin, and my cousin died, and I still in Gaza, but you know, all the people know what happened in Gaza now 15 years. Nothing in Gaza, this is the big prison, no one can go outside, no medical, no medication, no electricity, nothing, no life. And no one know about that. In this time, the Israel bombs me, and I went Shifa hospital, this is the big hospital in Gaza, but there's nothing, no surgery, no anything. And this time, the doctor said, this Muhammad don't have anything in the body, just the hard work. And we cannot do anything in Gaza, there's nothing. And just we tried to go, to help him to go outside in Gaza, and I cannot go outside because everything closed. But because I went straight, and the occupation Israel helped me to go take my medical inside for 3 years. And when, in 2014, I take the bombs in 2011, and I went in Israel 3 years, take just medication. And when I went 18, the Israel told me, go to visit your family in 2014. And I go to visit my family in this time, there's a new war in Gaza, and the Israel bombs everywhere. I go to visit my family, but I don't see family, and I don't see my house, I don't see anything there. In this time, I stay in the garden, a hospital garden, and when the war finished, I stayed in the street for 2 years, when the world wake up and tell Gaza to do new houses. And right now, what happened in Gaza? This is easy when say Holocaust. There's everyday Holocaust in Gaza. And right now, I talk here, I'm just body here, and my heart, my mind in Gaza, because now, 3 weeks, I don't know anything about my family, and Israel bombed the house and my family inside. And I don't know if my family is still alive or my family died. I don't know anything. But all the time, I still look in the media, but the media here, or United States or Europe, nothing about Gaza, just about Israel, what happened in Israel. And what happened in Gaza, no one knows. No one knows that Israel, what they every day kill the children, bomb the houses, bomb the hospital, and bomb the school. And when the people leave the houses to go to anywhere, the Israel bombs where's the people going. And right now, in Gaza, nothing, just bombs. Sometimes in the morning in Vancouver, there's rain, water, and all the people enjoy. But in Gaza, rain, bombs. And this not Israel bombs only. There's United States bombs and Europe bombs. And no one talk about Gaza and what happened in there. And this city, 70 years closed, prison. No one can go outside, no one can go to do anything. I'm lucky now because I'm here. It was not easy to come here. Because I moved Gaza for 5 countries to do surgery. I did now 25 surgery. And the last surgery, this 3 weeks ago, I did a new surgery. This is the big surgery. I changed my knee. I'm young. And no one talk about that, and no one talk about the humanity. The humanity just up the table, and down the table in the world, just bombs, support Israel. Okay, talk about Israel, don't worry, but talk about another side. Told the world needs to know what happened in another side. And what happened in 2.5 million, close 15 years, 17 years old, and now just bombs. You need to kill all these people? For what? Now all the time that Israel just killed children. Just children. Now there's 5,000 children in Gaza, 5,000 children died. And the families, with all the families. And right now, me, I'm here. I'm talking, but I don't have any word to say what I feel now. Now, I don't know anything about all the family. And now there's what happened in Gaza is terrible. It's easy to talk Holocaust. It's very easy. There's nothing. But what happened in Gaza, there's nothing. When the Israel bombs, for example, big area and the houses, and don't care who inside. Children, don't care. Just bombs. Just need the bombs. And when we need to talk about the humanity, who's can bombs hospital? Where's the humanity? Who's in the hospital? Okay. In the school. Who's in the school? Now we have the student. You know who's in the school? Just the students, children. But the Israel don't care. Just need to kill. And the world supports that. And no one talk about that. And I don't know. And this very, very, very terrible there. And right now, all the media talk in this way, and no one know what happened in Gaza. Now you know there's no electricity at hospital there. No one knows that. You know there's a lot of people now die because don't have water in Gaza. No. There's a lot of people. If you don't die in the bombs, you die because you're hungry and because you don't have water, because you don't have anything. And I don't know. I need to do something, but I cannot. All the time, just I see the media and I talk to people in the street and the hospital. I say, but nothing. No one can do anything. And the big country support Israel and help on this side and don't care and don't need to see in this way what happened. And just help for bombs. Okay, you can do this. You can do what you want. And no one told it. And no country said, why? Stop. What happened there? And we can go to visit Gaza to see what happened there. Or what Israel doing there. No one do that. And I don't know. I don't know why I can say it. I don't have words to say. I don't know. And right now I'm come here from hospital. And just I need to talk this what happened in Gaza because all the media talk in this way. And this right now, all the people dying in Gaza, no one cares. It's all the time bombs. And I don't know. When we need to talk about the humanity, where's the humanity? Where is this? The humanity in this way and this way, nothing? I don't understand. And all the time, for example, talk about the humanity in the media, or we, all the students study the humanity and we need to talk about the humanity and to be safety and. But where is this in this way? In Middle East, there's nothing. For example, what happened in different countries, the same. There's nothing, no one care about that. What happened there, no one care about that. But now in Gaza, the situation is very, very, very bad. It's very, very difficult. And we need to do something, but I don't know. I need to do something about the people who live there, about my family. I need to know anything about my family, but I cannot. I called a lot of people there, international call, just to ask, where's my family, I don't know where's my family, I don't know anything. Ask at hospital, no one know. Ask at school, no one know. Okay, anyone can go to visit my house, my area where I live, to see where's my family? Say no one can go there because there is a door inside. And now I don't know, just I'm waiting. Just I'm block the media and I'm waiting, I cannot do anything and I don't know. I hope the world wake up and everything will change and to stop the war in Gaza.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the greetings from our indigenous sisters. I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you went to high school here in Canada? Okay, thank you. Raise your hand again if you knew that in this country, until a few decades ago, an indigenous little girl aged 4, if she spoke her native tongue, she'd have a pin stuck in her tongue. Raise your hand if you learned that in school. 1 or 2 people. Raise your hand if you know that in Haida Gwaii, where I was 6 weeks ago, giving a trauma workshop to the Haida people, a 5-year-old little girl, when she spoke her native language, which is the only language she knew, at the school, she was beaten with a stick, so she was black and blue. In this province, raise your hand if you learned that in school. Nobody. So they gave me this bracelet after that trauma workshop. And you said that words matter. This is a carving, a Haida carving that means these words matter. So the words that we speak and how we speak them matter. Now, just as here now mentioned the bodies of the little children that were found first near colonial and then elsewhere. 2 months before those findings, those grisly findings, there was a poll done in Canada, a national opinion poll. 70% of Canadians said they knew nothing or little about the residential schools. You know what? That's what a colonial system does. It erases the history and the identity and the culture of the people being colonized. In Australia, there was a referendum in the last 2 or 3 weeks. There was a very mild initiative designed to institute some very non-binding consultation with Indigenous people when it came to passing new laws. The Australians defeated that referendum. People that have come to a land where they've taken the place of the original inhabitants never know and don't appreciate the actual experience of the people they displaced. That's the first one. It's no different than what we now call Israel Palestine. Now, the fact that I'm Jewish gives me no special authority to speak on this subject. The fact that my grandparents died in Auschwitz gives me no special authority to speak on the subject. The fact that I myself barely survived the genocide as an infant gives me no special authority to speak on the subject. My speaking on the subject means only one thing, which is that it's completely not true that all Jews are united behind the actions of what they call the Jewish state. That is not true. A few days ago in New York, hundreds of my fellow Jews were arrested, protesting at what they call the genocide in Palestine. It's a very painful subject because it feeds on so much historical trauma. And I'll be speaking about that in a moment. But this is not the first time I've talked at UBC about this subject. You know what the first time was? 1967. Long before most of the here were even born. Long before your parents even met each other, possibly. Up until that point, I'd been a Zionist. I really believed in the dream of the Jewish homeland reborn in our ancient precincts, of the barbed wire of Auschwitz being replaced by the boundaries of a free state, by the fallen heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising being reincarnated in the proud army of a Jewish state. Let me tell you something about the Warsaw Ghetto. In 1943, when the Germans had emptied that hellhole of most of the Jews and sent them to die in concentration camps, a few Zionists and socialists and other fighters got together and they said, we're not going to die passively. And they instituted a revolt, which the Germans had to come in and suppress with utter brutality. They put the whole ghetto to flame. When people jumped out of windows to save their lives, the Germans called them parachutists. Such contempt did they have for the people that they were murdered. The last living leader of the Warsaw Ghetto was a man named Marek Edelman. He was a physician. He survived. He's the only surviving leader of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. And he fought as a partisan against the Germans for the rest of the war. And after the war, he became a cardiologist and a man of principle. So when the communist regime began to suppress the trade union movement, Marek Edelman stood up for them. And it was Marek Edelman, this hero, who died at age 90, whose passing was barely mentioned in the Jewish press. Do you know why? Because he said, and he wasn't talking about Hamas, he was talking about the Palestinian resistance in general. And he said that today's Warsaw Ghetto fighters are the Palestinian resistance. They don't talk about it much. Now, I'm not here to speak on behalf of the Palestinians. They haven't appointed me as a spokesperson. I'm just here to speak the truth that I learned. That's all. No special authority. Just what I learned. And I learned it first when I first found out about the genocide in Europe, the Holocaust that took so many of my family. I was 11 years old when I found out the details in the book that my parents had hidden on the top shelf. And for years afterwards, I'm telling you, my head would spin, literally, saying, how is this possible? Every single day. How can people do this? And then, as I said, I became a Zionist. And in 1967, I even volunteered to go to Israel as the build-up to the war happened. I didn't go, my brother did, he was sitting here. I didn't go because the war broke out and it was over so quickly before I got my visa. But after the war, a question occurred to me. Because this was the time of the Vietnam War. Now, the Vietnam War, to many of you, may seem like ancient history, like the First World War seems to me. But for those of us that were young at that time, we watched in horror as the so-called leader of the free world massacred 3 million peasants in the name of a complete lie. And that's when I began to ask questions. And the question was, because that mass murder was, guess what, supported by the media, lied about every day. The local media, the national media, the international Western media. And the question that occurred to me was, why are those same cheerleaders for mass murder in Vietnam supporting Israel in this war in 1967? And that's when I began to do the research. And I wrote an article in the UBC in the fall of '67, in which I gathered all the evidence showing that, contrary to the propaganda, Israel had not been attacked, was not going to be attacked, that the Arabs were in no position to take on Israel, and that the Israeli military staff knew that, and they laughed at the idea that the Arabs were a threat to them. And I suggested that Israel undertook a war of expansion and expected them never to give these territories back. 1967. That article got me kicked out of my father's house and not thoroughly admired in the Jewish community. Not thoroughly. But I made a decision that what I understood as the truth was more important to me personally, than whether my family likes me or whether my community accepts me. Because that slogan, never again, cannot be a tribal slogan. If it doesn't apply to everybody, then it doesn't apply to anybody. So let me tell you a little about what I've learned about Israel-Palestine. Let me also say something that some of you here may not like at all, but again, that's too bad. What happened on October 7th was an atrocity. Civilians, children, should not be murdered anywhere, anytime, by anyone. And I totally understand, to many of my fellow Jews, what they call was the largest killing of Jewish people since the Holocaust seemed like just another episode in the centuries-old litany of anti-Semitism. I can understand how they see it that way. But if they see it that way, and then the grief and the rage and the fear, I totally get it. Those are natural human emotions. But what's missing is what the Israeli historian Ilan Pappé, one of the great voices on the history of that troubled land, has called the dehistoricization of the conflict. And Ilan Pappé has pointed out just a few days ago, just like I pointed out, it did not begin on October the 7th. That doesn't justify anything. The question is not to make somebody wrong and somebody else right. The question is, what do we have to understand if we're going to move forward to any kind of a peaceful resolution? What are we going to have to understand if we're going to find compassion in our own hearts? The ancient Hindu epic, the Mahabharata says that as soon as you consider the lives of your own children more important than the lives of other people's children, war is inevitable. And we can see now how cheaply the lives of Palestinian children is held in the Western press. Oh, they just couldn't help it. You gotta get rid of Hamas. So what if 5,000 children or 4,000 are killed? So, let me tell you what I've learned about the history. First of all, it does come out of trauma. I mean, the impetus for Zionism, for the movement to establish a Jewish state in Palestine, came out of horrific persecution in Eastern Europe. And all the major Zionist leaders came out of Eastern Europe. Now, the originator of the movement, Theodor Herzl, was actually a Hungarian Jew, like me. His birthplace used to stand where the great synagogue in Budapest is, where I was just a couple of weeks ago. And Herzl was working as a journalist, I think in Vienna, when some real anti-Semitic manifestations shocked him into this realization, as he understood it, that Jews need a state of their own where they can be safe. Here's what's interesting. And that's a totally understandable motive. Completely understandable. Some rabbis in Vienna, after Herzl had published his book, The Jewish State, in which I don't think the Palestinians are even mentioned. Some rabbis in Vienna sent two of their colleagues to Palestine to evaluate Herzl's dream. When they came back, you know what they said? The bride is beautiful, but she's already married. By which they meant that the Zionist slogan, a land without a people, for a people without a land, was a complete lie. There was a people there. You can argue legalistically that there's no Palestinian state ever. Well, that's true. So what? There's lots of states that were forged or developed in the 19th, 20th centuries where there used to be no state before, but there's the people there. So The first point I'm making is that one of the streams that flowed into creating this torrent of suffering was Jewish trauma in Eastern Europe, which culminated, of course, in the Holocaust, but didn't begin with the Holocaust. There's a second strain, though, that I've just talked about, which is there was the people already there. So in effect, whatever claim Jews could make to having been there 2,000 years ago, and that's a highly debatable issue of all the Jews today are originating from there and all that. I mean, I'm not going to go into it. It doesn't even matter. Let's grant that the Jews had a right to dream of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Just for the sake of argument, let's grant that. But even then, there was a problem. There was another people there. What are you going to do? Well, the only way you could achieve your goals is by colonizing the country, which is to say, displacing the local population. This is not retrospective. This was said at the time. In 1903, 1904, Zionist leaders pointed out that there is no land without a people. And some of them said that therefore we shouldn't proceed. Others decided otherwise, that the Jewish situation was so desperate that it doesn't matter who we have to displace and what we have to do. Let me tell you what two of the leading Zionist leaders said. David Ben-Gurion was the first Prime Minister of Israel and the leader of what was called then the Labor Zionist movement, the Mapai party that became today's Labor. And Ben-Gurion said in the 1930s, we call the Arab terrorists. But they're just defending their land. They're doing exactly what we would do if we were in their place, he said privately to his fellow leaders. Publicly, these Arabs are terrorists. Vladimir Jabotinsky, another Zionist leader, who founded what's called the, at that time, revisionist Zionism, a friend of my grandfather's who died in Auschwitz. Jabotinsky said exactly the same thing. They're just defending their land. But Jabotinsky and Ben-Gurion both decided that doesn't matter. We need this land more than they do, or we have the right to more than they do. Therefore, we have to do whatever we have to do. Moshe Dayan, who is one of the heroes of Israeli military history, in 1956, he spoke at the burial of an Israeli soldier who was killed in Gaza or near Gaza. And he said, let's not cast blame on the murderers today. Why should we deplore their burning hatred for us for 8 years, not 80 years. At that time it was 1956. For 8 years. They have been sitting in the refugee camps in Gaza, and before their eyes we have been transforming the lands and villages where they and their fathers dwelt and made it into our state. This is Moshe Dayan in 1956. So first of all, there's the Jewish trauma. Then there's the fact that it had to be achieved by colonial means. No other way. There was no other way. Even theoretically, there was no other way. Because what I like for you to imagine is, go to some Palestinian home in 1947 or 1930, well, let's say 1920, when there were roughly, I think, 75,000 Jews in Palestine, mostly immigrants, and about 600,000 Arabs. I made up the numbers slightly wrong. And Dr. Ader, head of the Zionist Commission, said, our aim is to make Palestine as Jewish in as short time as possible, as England is English and America is American. So I want you to imagine going into a Palestinian home in Haifa, in Jaffa, in Jerusalem, in Ramallah, in Bethlehem, in Gaza, and explain to them, well, I'm very sorry. We need this land. Get out of here. And my aim is to make your land as Jewish as America is American in as short a time as possible. How are they supposed to feel about it? And that's the history. But that itself would not be enough. There had to be enough. So first of all, there's the Jewish drama. Secondly, there is the necessity for colonial enterprise. And thirdly, there's something else that had to happen. Because there's no way that the Zionist movement on its own could have taken over this land. They needed imperial support. And this is where the Balfour Declaration comes in. In 1917, David Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, says, Her Majesty's government views with favor the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Well, first of all, who the hell is David Balfour to view with favor anything 10,000 years ago? But you know why they said it? Not because they like the Jews. They don't give a damn about anybody. I was in Westminster Abbey recently. All these monuments to mass murderers. People that killed indigenous people all over the world. Why did they do it? Because Winston Churchill said in 1920 or 1922 that the establishment of a Jewish entity in Palestine accords with the best interests of the British Empire. And then there was the First World War, of course, where the Turkish Ottoman Empire was defeated and parceled out. And the French and the British made a little agreement between them. They made all these promises to the Arabs for independence if they joined the revolt against the Turks. Agreements that they never expected or even meant to keep for a minute. So they just basically took the Middle East, the French and the British, and they cut it up like pieces of pie. You get Jordan, you get Saudi Arabia, you get Palestine, you get Syria, you get Lebanon. Just carved it up like a pie. And so there was the British mandate. And it was under that mandate which favored Jewish immigration until very late, favored and supported the establishment of a Jewish military organization, the Haganah, favored the establishment of Jewish political institutions, and utterly suppressed the organizations of the local Palestinians. Brutally suppressed them. In 1936, 1939, there was the Arab Revolt. The British defeated it with the utmost brutality. 1936 to 1939. Then comes the establishment of the state. Now the argument is that the United Nations divided the land between the two people, and the Arabs rejected it, the Jews accepted it. Total nonsense. First of all, there was no Palestinian leadership to accept or reject anything because the British had suppressed Palestinian political organizations, and they were never consulted. Secondly, who the hell was the United Nations to carve up a land? Who was the United Nations? America and its brutal dictatorship allies in South America, and Communist Russia and its brutal dictatorship partners in Eastern Europe. And these are the people that so magnanimously divided up the land. And how did they divide it? That the Jewish minority, which at that time was about 600,000-700,000, mostly recent immigrants, desperate recent immigrants, got 56% of the land. And their majority, which was twice as great, got the smaller portion of the land. And furthermore, the land was so divided that more Jews got to live in the Jewish state, whereas hundreds of thousands of Arabs would have to agree to live under Jewish suzerainty. I'm not going to go on too much about the history. I'm just going to tell you that everything you're told in the Western press is pretty much as much of a lie as they told around the time of Vietnam, as they told the same Western press that brought you to the Iraq War, and the weapons of mass destruction is now bringing to you this ideology of relentless Arab terrorism and poor Israel trying to defend itself. Against who? Well, let me read you something by an Israeli journalist. And please notice, in this talk, I'm not going to quote Palestinians. Not because they don't have the right to speak, not because what they say is invalid, but because maybe if you hear these words from Israeli mouths and Jewish mouths, maybe you'll be more open to hearing them. Which itself is sheer racism, by the way. In that sense, I am succumbing to racism here. But here's what, excuse me a second. I'm going to quote the journalist Amira Haas, who has lived in Gaza. Well, I'm not going to find a quote now because the papers are too much messy. But Amira Haas, who has lived in the West Bank for 30 years and has also lived in Gaza, and is reported regularly in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, said that what happened recently is that Israelis experienced what the Palestinians have been experiencing for decades. Mass murder, the death of their children, fear, despair, bodies lined up in the streets. There are such voices in Israel. You never hear them here in the West, except in the alternative media. There's a Jewish historian, works at Stockton University in the States. He's a scholar of the Holocaust. He's Israeli, by the way. And he wrote an article recently in Jewish Currents where he said that what the Israelis are doing right now in Gaza is a textbook case of genocide. That's not my word. I'll call it a war crime, I'll call it mass murder. But according to the international criteria for genocide, it is. I would reserve genocide where somebody, not for political reasons, or I suppose for any reason, decides to wipe out a whole people. It's not that Israel has decided to wipe out our whole people, it's just that they're ready to do it if they have to achieve their goals. And what is their goal? We keep hearing about the Hamas Constitution, or the Hamas Charter, that no Jews in Palestine. Well, I don't know, maybe that's true. I've never read the Hamas Charter. Let's say that it's true. Does anybody ever talk about the constitution of the Likud party, the governing party in Israel? It says no non-Jewish entity between Jordan and the sea. Does anybody hear about that? When the New York Times would write about Hamas years ago, it always say Hamas is an organization that denies the right of Israel to exist. When they talk about Likud, do they say Likud is an organization that denies the right of the Palestinians to exist? No. Let me consult my notes and see what else I want to say to you before I take questions. Oh yeah, 1947-48. The myth that I used to buy into is that Jews wanted to establish their state, United Nations, and all that. But first of all, if we're going to cite the United Nations, let's be consistent about it. By the way, I don't question the right of Israel to exist. I don't question the right of anybody to exist. America was founded on colonialism and slavery. I don't question the right of America to exist. Canada was founded on colonialism and brutal suppression of the indigenous population. I don't question the right of Canada to exist. It exists. The question is, what are we going to do moving forward? How are we going to deal with the past and the present? That's the real question. I do question the right of any state to exist as constituted if it's based on purely racist principles. when my fellow Jews, some of them say that to criticize Israel is to be anti-Semitic, well, first of all, we have to acknowledge there's anti-Semitism. It's real. It's pervasive. There's also anti-Muslim sentiment. It's real and it's pervasive. There's also anti-black sentiment. In Canada, there's plenty of anti-Indigenous sentiment. There's racism in this world. Nobody owns it, either as perpetrator or victim. But when people say to me that by criticizing Israel, you're fomenting anti-Semitism, I just want to laugh in their face. I say, are you kidding me? Which looks worse in the eyes of the world? That all Jews unite voicelessly, silently, behind the displacement, ethnic cleansing, and mass murder of the people, but that there should be an honest debate in the Jewish community. Which is more likely to support anti-Semitism, do you think? And it's Zionism that identifies Jewishness with the state. It was never true. Back in 1895 or in 1900, there was a Jewish writer and philosopher called Asher Ginsberg, or to call him by his Hebrew name, Ahad Aham, which means one people. And Ahad Aham said, around 1900 or even before, if we continue to treat the Arabs this way, all we're going to end up is one small Levantine people tormenting another small Levantine people. And he said, if this is the Messiah coming, I don't want to see him arrive. So it was never true that Zionism spoke for Jews, and it's not true now. And it's an absolute slander to accuse people who in good faith criticize the policy of the state and the system that generates those policies with anti-Semitism. It's just, you know what it is? It's intellectual and emotional blackmail, that's what it is. Now, are there not some anti-Semites that would jump on the anti-Israel bandwagon? Of course there are. But they're not anti-Semitic because of what Israel does or doesn't do. They just hate Jews because they're sick. Just like all racists are sick. Am I going to stop the fact that there's a few people, relatively few really, who use anti-Zionist critique opportunistically? Should that make me shut up? Should that make you shut up when you see injustice? Well, in Jewish tradition, well, there's many streams in Jewish tradition, and there's a rabbi friend of mine here in the room who could tell you a lot more about Jewish tradition than I can. But there's two major streams that I've detected. One of them is tribal, nationalistic, chauvinistic, and even murderous. This is not unique to Jews, by the way. Look at the history of almost any country. You'll find the same thing. But this one goes back to the Bible. Benjamin Netanyahu the other night quoted the Bible, Samuel 1:15-3, where he said, the Lord said, remember what Amalek has done to you. Amalek was a local nation that stood in the way of the Israelites, historically, at least mythically, coming into the Holy Land. And that God, according to the Old Testament, commanded the Jews, the Israelites, to kill every man, woman, and infant Amalekite. A call for genocide. In our Bible, in the Holy Torah. So that's one stream. The tribal, nationalistic, egoic, if I may put it that way. There's another strength in Judaism which I align with and I'm very proud of, which is just the opposite, which is the prophetic tradition, which actually says to people in authority, you have no right to oppress people, that they're higher value than king and country. And those higher values have to do with what we call God. Call that truth. And if you transgress the truth, the land will vomit you out. So say the prophets. And the same Old Testament that talks about massacring all the population. I just quoted to you. And Benjamin Netanyahu just quoted. Can you imagine a more open and shameless call for genocide than quoting that particular passage, for God's sakes? Who speaks that way? At a time of great rage and hatred and suffering and grief on all sides. But the same Old Testament also says, "Thou shalt not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger. You who yourselves are strangers in Egypt." That's a call for compassion. That's a call for understanding the situation of the other. That's a call for universal human belongingness. Well, I can understand on the emotional level how, given a certain interpretation of Jewish history and certain despicable and undeniable horrors in Jewish history, some of my people will line up with that first strain. But not me, and not many of my fellow Jews in Israel who tell the truth. It was not a Palestinian, but an Israeli scholar who called Gaza the largest concentration camp in the world. Baruch Kimmerling, his name was. It was Elam Papi, the Israeli historian, who documented the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Read the book. Don't argue with me, argue with him and his research. What a deliberate campaign of killing, expulsion, demolitions, cruelty was carried out. And sometimes even rape. That wasn't part of the policy, but people felt emboldened to do that. That's what happened in 47, 48. In 1956, the same year that Moshe Dayan gave that speech, he says, can we blame them for hating us? The Israeli army went into a Palestinian village called Kfar Yunus, led by the future Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, and massacred hundreds of Palestinian men, women, and children. Do we talk about that? As Mohammed said, do we talk about that? Do you remember Sabra Shatia, the Lebanese Palestinian refugee camps where the Israeli army allowed the fascist Lebanese Phalange militia into undefended Palestinian refugee camps where they murdered up to 2,000 men, women, and children? Do we talk about the 20,000 civilians that were killed in Israeli completely unprovoked attack on Lebanon in 1982? Do we talk about operations Cast Lead and Protective Edge, where, as Mohammed mentioned, Israel killed by bombs hundreds of Palestinian children and others, and the world stood by? Let me sum this up and stop. I didn't give this speech to cast blame. I gave this blame to clarify history. And those of you that don't believe me, do your research. Read those Israeli historians. Read those brave journalists. And then make up your own mind. But for God's sakes, just for 1 minute, put yourself inside the subjective experience of the other. But the Western pastor, I was in Gaza, I visited the occupied territories 3 times in my life. The last time it was a year ago in June of 2022. You have to see it to believe it. The oppression is unspeakable. How many of you know this? That the former deputy chief of the Israel Defense Forces said 3 or 4 months ago, or 5 months ago, that the situation in the West Bank reminds him of the situation of the Jews in Nazi Germany before the war. And what he meant by that is that the Nazi thugs, the brown shirts, could assault and kill Jews, and the police would not only not intervene, they would actually help them. And he said, that's what we're doing to the Palestinians in the West Bank. Said the former deputy chief of the Israeli army. Go argue with him. Don't argue with me. Tell him that he's wrong. This year in the West Bank, about 250 Palestinians, including children, have been killed by the Israeli army and the settlers. And when the settlers show up to demolish a home or burn down an olive grove or to harass Palestinians in their own houses, when the Palestinians try to defend themselves, the army shows up and kills the Palestinians. Do you ever hear about this in the Western press? If you don't hear about it, why don't you hear about it? You don't hear about it because Israel is peanuts. Palestine is peanuts in the hands of the rulers of this world. The United States does not support Israel because America loves the Jews. Forget that one, okay? Empires don't love anybody except their own power. The United States does not support Israel because the Jews control America. That's just an anti-Semitic trope. The United States supports Israel the same reason they supported the right-wing dictatorship in Chile that murdered thousands of its own people. That, you know, the same reason that they moved into Iraq, killing 500,000 people. The same reason they fought this war in Afghanistan, killing 300,000 people. And then they end up running with their tail between their legs. The same reason they killed 3 million people in Vietnam. Did you even know that in Guatemala, in the 1990s, 100,000 indigenous people were killed by the Guatemalan army that was trained by the Americans, by the Israeli forces? You never even hear about it. In Belgium, they're beginning to talk about the fact that the Belgians killed 10 million Congolese 115, 120 years ago. Anybody teach you about it in your schools? So history is told by those who control the levers of power. In terms of moving forward, you know, right now, I don't have any sense or real possibility, because I see what's happening, and I see it escalating, and I see that there are few voices opposing it in the States and in Israel and elsewhere being drowned out. At the same time, I'm encouraged, because when I saw these 400 Jews in New York getting arrested, I cried. I was moved. And if nothing else, the current crisis has brought to the attention, if not of our leaders, because they don't care, frankly, but at least of many people of conscience, that there is a Palestinian nation, that there is a land which is being ethnically cleansed. 20 years ago, there were 360,000 Palestinians living in the Jordan Valley. You know how many there are now? 80,000. What do you call that? Ethnic cleansing. The world is beginning to wake up. I just hope it wakes up in time, because the time is running fast. And right now, the killers are in charge. We must not let them appropriate the history and appropriate the truth. That's in our hands. Thank you.
My parents are the survivor of the 1971 genocide of Bangladesh, and through my own people's history, I have seen the role of art in liberation and revolution. Do you think there's a role of art here in the Palestinian liberation?
Well, there's always a role of art. There was art in the concentration camps, where Jews were being murdered, where Jewish children drew pictures, musicians wrote music, artists created art, writers wrote. Same in Palestine. Beautiful poetry, music, art. Art speaks to and from the soul of a people. And even when bodies don't survive, the soul does. So yeah, art has a big role to play everywhere. And that's also true here in Canada, by the way. All right?
Okay, there's a question here.
Firstly, I would like to thank you for speaking up, especially for the Jewish community. I grew up in a Jewish community, and I can proudly say Israel does not stand for the values of Judaism and the Jewish people. I wanted to ask you, I am the grandchild of a couple that were exiled in '67 in the Naksa, and I have not returned, nor has anybody since their generation. But this month it has been extremely heavy-hearted month, and I don't know if the word traumatized is appropriate, but how do you continue with the sadness? You
know, not all of, but much of, the Jewish response to the present situation can be explained by Jewish trauma. It's just how it is. When I was in the West Bank last year, a Palestinian woman whose neck had been broken by the Israeli army at a peaceful demonstration. And thanks to an Israeli surgeon, back together again when they never thought she would walk again. And now what she does is she does Sufi dancing with Palestinian children who've been jailed by Israel. And by the way, the hostage situation, yeah, we cry and worry for the hostages. And we have to remember that Israel holds 7,000 hostages also in its prisons. Men, women, even advanced age children. Who speaks on their behalf? But this friend of mine in Ramallah told me that we don't have post-traumatic stress disorder here because the trauma is never post. Now right now, Israel's going through a traumatizing time, there's no question about it. We have to understand that. But like Amir Harris points out, the Palestinians have been living with this trauma for 80 years now. And as the Jewish scholar Norman Finkelstein, whose book on Gaza is required reading for anybody who really wants to know the history of Gaza, this myth that Israel left Gaza and they're still not grateful enough, they still have, no, it's nonsense. They just threw it into a concentration camp with the guards on the outside. Did I mention that in 1980, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but in 2018 and 19, Gazans instituted what they call the Great March of Return. Not Hamas did. Non-violent Palestinian groups initiated it. And without weapons, they marched up to the border, demanding the right to return to the fields that their fathers and mothers and grandparents had been expelled from with brutal force. Peacefully, Israeli snipers killed 200 of them, one by one. Some of them clearly identified as medical people with a large Red Cross or Red Crescent. Nah, they still got shot. If you look at history, oppressed and traumatized people sometimes respond in ways that are brutal. I'm not justifying it, I'm just saying that's what happens. when you beat people, when you make people desperate and utterly devoid of any hope. If you look at the black slave revolt, not Turner's revolt in the United States, they brutalized some of those slave owners and perhaps innocent others. When the peasant revolts in the Middle Ages against the oppression by the nobility, they committed atrocities against landowners and the nobles. When the slaves revolted against their situation in Rome, it was pretty brutal. That's what happens when you brutalize and oppress people and you deprive them of any hope whatsoever. And there's no place more hopeless in the world than Gaza. I'm not justifying anything. I'm just saying a lot of people said afterwards, including myself, this was bound to happen. This was bound to happen. Or do we want to prevent it from happening again? Do we want to prevent the Palestinians from suffering the way they're being crucified right now in the name of self-defense?
Okay, so we have another question here.
Hi. Okay, cool. So I work for an organization that represents 60,000 people. A few years ago, this organization held a BDS referendum, and those 60,000 members voted in favor, and the organization officially adopted the BDS referendum to boycott, divest, and sanction companies, organizations that support particularly the settler colonial aspects of the apartheid Israeli states. As a staff member of this organization, I am not allowed to speak out against it. However, do you have any advice for those of us within this organization or similar organizations who would like to push the leadership to not be so avoidant? Because as of right now, despite the BDS referendum, they have chosen to not make or say anything or even acknowledge what is currently happening.
Yeah. Well, the fact is that on this issue was being enforced this strict McCarthyism, or you can call it Stalinism, where there's no dissent allowed. So this argument that boycott and divestment is anti-Semitic because you're boycotting Jewish businesses, well, for God's sakes. When people boycotted South Africa, it wasn't because they were white or English or Boers. It's because they were running an oppressive apartheid regime. Do people know, was it reported in the Western press that 3 months ago, 2,000 Jewish and Israeli rabbis, intellectuals, historians signed a declaration calling Israel an apartheid state? That the former head of Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, has called it what's happening in the West Bank an apartheid situation? I don't know what to tell you. Right now at Langara, there's an indigenous scholar called Natalie Knight who dared speak at a pro-Palestinian rally. The Jewish Federation and the allied organizations put tremendous pressure on Langara to have her fired. She said nothing that I haven't said. She's been suspended from Langara, put on leave while they investigate. What are they investigating? I've had a speaking invitation at a major Canadian university, withdrawn. This was going to happen next week. It's not going to happen.
Hey.
No, I don't give a damn. I don't need one more speaking invitation. It's going to happen 2 weeks from now. I don't need one more speaking invitation. But those of you with jobs, those of you who are within organizations, who speak up on this issue, you're under threat. In the Ontario legislature, there was a member of the legislature, a member of the NDP, who dared speak on behalf of Palestinian rights. She was censured by the legislature and excluded from the NDP caucus. So much for democratic socialism. So it's a genuine problem. It's sheer McCarthyism, it's intimidation, and it's going to continue. And the worse the crimes of the Israeli state look in the eyes of the world, the more desperate its supporters are going to be to silence all voices of dissent. I'm pretty sure if I was still a physician, licensed to practice, but I gave that up, 12 years ago now? Some of my colleagues would be complaining to the BC, to the essentially what was then the BC Medical Association or the College of Physicians for spreading hatred. In fact, it happened. Even then. So, I don't know what to tell you. You have to make a decision. Can you afford to speak out? And can you live with the consequences? I can't tell you what to do. Except to say that it's happening all over the place. That's how it is.
Thanks. Hi, thank you for sharing your story and reminding us the history that I think many of us may know or may not know, but at the beginning of your speech you mentioned what colonial state does and how in that referendum so many Canadians didn't know. Like, I think the last residential school closed in like 95. How so many people didn't know, and that's what colonial state does, right? It gives us that short-sightedness. And my biggest fear right now is that we're right now kind of trauma bonding in many ways, looking at these like deaths happening. But when, let's say, there's a ceasefire called in an age of social media, in an age where big social media companies are shadow banning people, schools are taking away educational things that are so important and helpful for us, and removing that our right to have critical thinking and do our own research, how do we cope with and kind of live against the colonial agenda of wanting to wipe history, of wanting to tell a story, tell a narrative that this didn't happen, that these people didn't exist, that these were innocent children who were being killed? You may or may not have the answer, but love your thoughts.
Well, the only thing that springs to mind is the example of Joe Hill, who was, I think, Swedish-born American labor leader, who was murdered by the state, framed for a killing he didn't commit. And before he was executed, I forget when it was, 1920s or something around that time, Joe Hill said, "Don't mourn, organize." The only protection, if there's any, is to get together with like-minded people and organize and get as many people involved as possible, so that you don't feel alone. Yeah.
Hello. So, Doctor, I'm from Gaza. Every loved person I have is there right now. I really don't know what to ask you. I feel that I have the burden of asking 2.3 million people. They want me to speak to you. Every time I start my morning, or actually every couple of hours I sleep, I just wake up, look into my WhatsApp chat, family group, to see if they're still alive or not, to see what source of water they received, whether it was seawater, sewage water at this point. If my mom managed to find her medicine, my sister is disconnected from the world. I'm talking to her at this point and she is responding in the weirdest answers that has nothing to do with our reality anymore. I'm expecting the worst every single second. And whenever I ask someone, how do you feel? They laugh. Is that normal? That's my first question. My other one, you said that imperialist countries, they do not look at Israel or Palestine or Jews. Israel became a moral and financial burden towards the West. Thank you.
Look, you're living a nightmare right now. You're actually living a nightmare. It's reality and it's a nightmare. You couldn't have a worse nightmare than the reality right now. And you're asking me, is it normal? Well, whatever you're feeling and experiencing is a normal response to a completely abnormal situation.